You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Almost hysteria about the bombing has been immediately ending.
We have so much to talk about today, but where I'll start is that time when one of the largest contributors to the DNC running up to a presidential campaign was the RNC. I am so glad I get to talk about Quince on My History Can Beat Up Your Politics. I have a pair of blue jeans from them that look better, hold up nicer, and fit better than many of those jeans with the brand names that you know about, especially because some of those key brand names just aren't getting it done these days the way they used to. Everything at Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. Still, even with the great inflation, still Quince is getting it done. Elevate your summer wardrobe. Go to quince.com/myhist for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/MYHIST for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/myhist.
You have one new message. Translating. Disney and Pixar's Hoppers is now available on Disney+.
You could say that again.
Critics are calling it Pixar's funniest movie ever and a wildly entertaining ride. Blizzard Potato. It's certified fresh and verified hot.
Now we party.
This is incredible!
Wow, I am clearing the rest of the day.
Disney and Pixar's Hoppers, now available on Disney+. Rated PG.
It's 1976, that election, which would end up being Jimmy Carter as the nominee. What happens is, with the Watergate break-in, a crime was committed against the offices of the Democratic National Committee. Burglars who are found to be connected to the White House, to the Committee to Re-elect the President, offshoot of RNC, breaking into the Democratic National Headquarters in Washington, D.C., 1972, middle of a presidential election. I've heard that. We all know that story. What I didn't realize, lawsuits filed, the Democrats pretty quickly aware that this was more than just a random burglary of their office, that there was some skullduggery going on, is the term that DNC Treasurer Robert Strauss used. Lawrence O'Brien is the DNC chair. He's not a pushover. He worked with the Kennedys, and settlements and contributions that will eventually happen end up coming to roughly $700,000. Now, how much money is this in today's terms? Well, if you're just doing straight CPI, meaning like cost of eggs now, cost of eggs then, etc., you get about $5.5 million. This was a time when the Democratic Party, after having run George McGovern and winning one state out of 50, was broke. So that was one thing I wasn't aware of, a tiny story about the Watergate scandal, which is June of 1972. So we're talking about 54 years ago. I think it's still a very important story, and it's more important than just catching 5 people in it. So in this episode, I'm going to try to bring fresh perspectives to Watergate. Kind of buried in an oral history of Robert Strauss, that DNC treasurer, hard-talking Texan, had worked with Lyndon Johnson in the past. He had the chance to nearly double that donation, not from the RNC, but somebody who was friendly with the RNC. And he gets a call from a guy at ITT. Now, do we know ITT today? Yes, it still exists, but it's a lot smaller footprint than it used to be. It used to be up there with like IBM or Google, International Telephone and Telegraph, but they did so much more.
Today, we are the leaders. ITT.
They owned Sheraton Hotels. They owned Hartford Life Insurance. Those were the big ones. They owned like 8 or 9 big companies, and then they owned hundreds of smaller little concerns. The CEO is a Nixon donor. And so Bob Strauss gets a pretty urgent call from the company's lobbyist. Bob, I really need to see you. And, you know, any smart lobbyist will stay friendly with both parties. So it wasn't like Bob Strauss didn't know this guy. But he didn't expect to get much from him because ITT is a one of the Nixon donors, a Republican donor. We were friends. He said, Bob, I really need you. And I said, fine. He came over and said, I've got a serious problem. I'd like your advice on what to do about it. I trust you, and you're honest, and you can keep my confidence. Bob Strauss says, well, I hope so. And he said, there's a story being worked by a reporter, the St. Louis Dispatch, and she has a story she's working on that says the Republicans took a $400,000 contribution from ITT. Remember, that's big. That's millions of dollars in today's money. And for what they got an agreement from the White House. They would just let a big acquisition that ITT was trying to make go through instead of the Justice Department blocking it on antitrust grounds. Now that this story is coming out, they're claiming that it was a contribution for the Republican convention. So Bob Strauss is no dummy. He's a Democrat. This guy's telling him something about the Republicans. Yes, he said it in confidence. Bob Strauss is not going to use it, but it's going to come out in the papers anyway, according to this guy. So he said, well, is there any truth in the allegations? And the lobbyist says, I'd rather not answer that question. Strauss says, I'm going to remember what your answer was. I guess the only thought I have is if you're smart, you would make an equal contribution to the Democrats. The lobbyist says, damn, I don't know why I didn't think of that, Bob. Now, I want to pause here. I think this lobbyist heard exactly what he expected to hear. He knew Bob Strauss was going to say exactly this. Maybe he was just getting some advice from an old Washington hand. I think he knew that maybe something like this might be worked out. Bob Strauss says, we're just talking at a bar here. I don't think we'll take it. I'm not sure at all that Chairman O'Brien, he has the final say on this, and I don't think he's going to take your money. He fetches Lawrence O'Brien, says we have to talk, and Lawrence O'Brien says, Bob, can you pay for the Democratic Convention in 76? Can you raise enough money to pay for the damn thing? Because we should turn this money down. And Bob Strauss says, yes, we could use it, and we can spend some money we couldn't otherwise. But I feel like we can pay for the convention, and we can have a good convention. I'm raising enough money to see us through if we're careful. So Lawrence O'Brien says, then I think we should turn it down. This could be a big story. He sits down at the bar with this lobbyist, and the lobbyist says, sorry, you've got no deal. We went to the old man. And the old man is the CEO, Gannon, of ITT. And he turned it down cold. Gannon said, I'm not going to let anybody shake me down for $400,000. Bob Strauss says, good. We weren't shaking you down, and we were going to turn the money down anyway. Bob Strauss says to the guys at ITT, I just have one comment to make, and then we can finish our drinks. I don't know where this is going to end, but gentlemen, I have a hunch that this is going to be the most expensive $400,000 ITT ever saved, if they could have spent it. Bob Strauss says in his oral history, I've thought about it so many times. This reporter out there was working the story. They couldn't shut her up, and that was the beginning of Watergate. He's in Texas one weekend, and Lawrence O'Brien calls up and says, Bob, we've had a break-in in our offices. And they found that one of these burglars had his notebook, the White House switchboard number, written down with no name, but he had an extension number. And I think there might be something to this. It's awfully strange he had that number. Both of us suspected immediately there was skullduggery going on. Lawrence O'Brien makes the decision. I'm just going to blast them on this right now. And this is where you get the news story. You know, the first ones before you're getting too much into the Woodward and Bernstein and any investigators and things like that, is the DNC, is Lawrence O'Brien. Like, hey, we've been burglarized. Now there's a connection. One of these guys has a number from the White House. They're all well-dressed. Bob Strauss goes on. He kicked the hell out of the Republicans with that story, and everybody was enraged that he made a suggestion that the Republican National Committee, or even worse, people representing the White House could be involved in a burglary. But they were all deeply involved, and obviously we know what happened from there. So back to ITT. If you talk to folks like Strauss, if you talk to Ted Kennedy, if you talk to a few reporters, ITT begets this whole Watergate thing. ITT did very much make a donation to the Nixon campaign. And Nixon did very much influence his Justice Department to go easy on ITT. You just don't have that, and we're doing this because we got the 400,000. ITT's pretty known to be linked to Nixon, Watergate in the 1970s. The name doesn't have the same cachet now, and so we don't think about ITT. And it's a shame because we don't, our memory of Watergate is just like Deep Throat, Woodward and Bernstein, and 5 burglars getting caught. But it's much more expansive than that. And there were other nefarious activities connected to something that I would call like the greater Watergate. And ITT's part of this. This conglomerate was essentially shaken down. He may have supported Republicans anyway, but I don't think it was on his agenda to give this much. The Nixon administration actually has this McLaren, this prosecutor. He had negotiated settlements with other companies, and he had negotiated a settlement with ITT that imposed restrictions on what it could do in the future. So the company was forced to divest businesses. He doesn't want one company owning everything. But what's going to happen is Nixon's going to get involved in bypassing this particular investigation. In a phone call in 1971, he orders Deputy Attorney General Richard Kleindienst to shut down the whole thing. McLaren should be fired if he kept raising hell about conglomerates. Drop the goddamn thing. Direct presidential order. Kleindienst tries to follow the instructions without doing it. So, kind of like telling him to cool down a bit. But McLaren does not give up. The Justice Department already lost badly in court, and he wanted to win. And people by 1971 have pretty much forgotten about the whole thing, and nobody knew about Nixon's call. But then comes February 1972. Okay, so same year as Watergate, but earlier. And columnist Jack Anderson, probably the biggest columnist in the land at this time, publishes allegations that ITT had effectively bought favorable treatment by helping fund the 1972 Republican National Convention in San Diego with the 400,000. And it's tied to Dita Baird by a reporter named Britt Hume, who later would join Fox and actually would become a spokesperson for a president. But this time he's working to take one down, and in a sense. And Dita Baird was this fantastic Washington lobbyist, like one of the top D.C. lobbyists, and the only female among a lot in a profession, a lot of men. She could outdrink anyone, all this kind of thing. He gets Dita Baird, this lobbyist, to say, like, this is my memo, getting the price for how much needed to be given. It's only when the ITT Public Relations Department chews out Dita Baird that she then disappears, can't be found. Track her down to this hospital, can't talk, can't testify in the Senate. And a group of senators come. She doesn't give great answers. But all of a sudden, all of it leads to the story being delayed enough to where it could be denied. And nothing further comes from that Dita Baird, from that memo. There's a lingering scandal there over ITT before Watergate even starts. During that story, he gets a phone call, Jack Anderson, from a source that says, I'm hearing about this break-in that's going to happen. And he does absolutely nothing with it. The whole time the DNC is being burglarized, June 17th, there's a guy looking out from across the street at the Howard Johnson's Hotel with binoculars, and he's able to see everything because the office is right across the street. But he doesn't take any notice of a raggedy blue car. This is what these detectives drive. And he doesn't notice the guys because of how they're dressed until they get all the way up to the 6th floor where the burglars are. And then he sees them through the window with their guns. And he doesn't know what to think. And he asks them through the walkie-talkie, like, how are you guys dressed? They said, in business suits. I said, well, now you've got a problem because there's armed hippies coming your way. And it's a strange moment, like what Baldwin was thinking. We don't really know, but it was, because you guys are ready to kind of look respectable and stuff so you can move through this office building. But for some reason, what's happening here is you've got angry hippie-like people are going to see you as the establishment, and we don't know why they're there. Something's wrong. He didn't immediately think they were cops. but they can't even say another word on the walkie-talkie. He hears, "Hands up." The cops that come to arrest them are not in blue uniforms. This is the interesting thing, because they were undercover and they wanted to move about D.C., being able to do their business. Now, these detectives interrogate these burglars, and it's very weird the way they're dressed. And they've got lock picks. Okay, maybe they're trying to get a safe. They've also got bugging devices, rolls of film. They're not sure what to make of it. They know this is a politically sensitive location. This isn't just any place to rob. But what really gets them suspicious is these guys have all this money, 24 $100 bills. DNC says that wasn't theirs. They didn't take it from them. Who burglarizes a place and brings money to it? These bills have sequential serial numbers. So that guarantees they've been bundled together at a bank. It's something like L3876521, L3876522A, L6387653A, like very suspicious. Here's what also makes them suspicious. A lawyer arrives, but none of these guys had ever called a lawyer. So the police get the FBI involved. The FBI can track it down, finds that the cash came from the same shipment, from the same area. It's a little bit of work, but even in the 1970s, with all the systems that we have, it's not impossible to detect. Like, where did you get this money from? How did that batch enter the banking system? Banks would have paper records of large withdrawals, cashier's checks, deposits, Federal Reserve shipment records. Fresh bills like these usually entered circulation through a Federal Reserve bank shipment, then to a commercial bank. You can trace all of that. And then investigators find one important check tied back to Kenneth Dahlberg, the treasurer of the committee to re-elect the president. That's when the scandal first explodes. So we think about Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, and look, they got their story out fast. They made the movie. They had the Deep Throat connection, which the secret, unrevealed source for so many years. We're now more than 20 years from that source being revealed. But if you're, say, 25 right now, I mean, that Deep Throat was quite a mystery. That kind of fueled the Watergate story. Everybody likes a good mystery. But anyway, we hear a lot about Woodward and Bernstein, and they're important. We're going to talk about them a bit. But the FBI is doing a lot of work investigating this behind the scenes. They're getting frustrated, though, by their superiors. Nixon had just appointed Patrick Gray to replace Edgar Hoover, and that's why we believe Mark Felt, the number 2 man at the FBI, goes on deep background. Deep background means he doesn't tell. So Deep Throat, the source, and there was a porn movie that came out at the time, and since he's on deep background, one of the Washington Post reporters came up with that name. Deep Throat doesn't reveal anything. He just confirms. Confirms if they're right or wrong. But I'm not sure if people are aware of this. Mark Felt will turn out to be the number 2 man at the FBI. And I don't think anybody really figured this out. Now, Mark Felt did have a reputation for leaking, and he's actually fired partially because of that. But the thing that he leaks on, and even Nixon is aware of it, is a different story from Watergate. But he's not really the guy that most suspect to be the Deep Throat. And he wasn't just a guy that Bob Woodward met in a dark garage and talked to like in the movie. Actually, Mark Felt and Bob Woodward went back a bit. He had been cultivating a relationship with Bob Woodward even before he was a reporter. Bob Woodward had been in the Navy. He was assigned to the White House. Sometimes Mark Felt saw him. They were both in the waiting rooms a bit. This was Woodward at the time was a guy that was going to be looking for a job soon. And he was cultivating contacts and thought he was going to become a lawyer, and then eventually became a reporter. So actually Felt had been in contact with Bob Woodward over the years at different times. I guess that's why he thought of him. May 1st, 1973, as the revelations unfolded, Nixon does take steps to try to contain the scandal. He fires the managers, Ehrlichman, Haldeman. Not his first choice of an action to take, but he's forced to do it. Half a dozen agents from the FBI immediately enter the White House and occupy the narrow hallways in the White House, near the offices of these men. The orders come from the director of the FBI who'd just been appointed, Strauss, used to be Nixon's EPA director. At first, when the FBI agents arrived, they're armed, and the Secret Service say, can't bring your guns in here. And there's a little bit of a standoff, and then somebody calls somebody, and the top of the bureaucracy, they come in. They're there to seal the offices of these two men that have just been fired. Nixon, who's in the office around 8 a.m., does not like this. They just fired good people, and now we're treating them like criminals. The hallways are narrow as he walked past one agent. He's annoyed, grabs him, shoves him in a chair, and says, "Bad enough I have to see you, effers. I don't want you in my way." Everybody's shocked. He will come back in a half hour and apologize, saying that, sorry, I'm under a lot of stress.
This episode is brought to you by Fox One. Watch all 104 matches of the FIFA World Cup live in 4K for just $19.99 a month with 3 days free. Build your own multi-view, choose up to 3 streams, and follow player spotlights. Stay on top of every moment with live stats, highlights, and instant replays. The FIFA World Cup, streaming live on Fox One. Offers are subject to change. See fox.com for complete terms and conditions.
But then, exactly what these FBI agents are trying to prevent happens. Haldeman comes back to his office even after he resigned. "I'm just here to grab a few papers," he says. An agent tries to stop him and says, you can't go in there. And Haldeman turns around. "You son of a... I'll have your job." And the agent says, "Mr. Haldeman, if you leave with those papers, you will be arrested." And the White House counsel, who is Leonard Gourmet, is summoned, thinks about it, and he says, sorry, Bob. You had weeks to shred him. If you didn't shred him by now, it's the FBI's turn. All that's left during this day is for Nixon to chew out his Attorney General, Kleindas, which he does. Kleindas didn't even know the FBI agents were being sent there. He's about to quit his job anyway as soon as Elliot Richardson gets appointed. Well, Kleindas isn't happy about it, and he knows he's quitting, and possibly that this president is facing a big scandal and might have to go. He says, "Well, Mr. President, you're wrong," and walks out.
We all know that this whole, almost hysteria about the bombing has been a media-created damn thing. Totally. But when you come down...
We don't know why the burglars entered the DNC. Some say they were looking for some evidence that Lawrence O'Brien had something on Nixon involving a loan from Howard Hughes. There was definitely at least one loan, probably several, to Nixon during recently, and his brother Donald got a loan, and so there's a possibility they wanted to know what the connection was. They went after Lawrence O'Brien, we know that. They wanted that phone. It's a second operation. This is a key thing. So they're not going in to take one item. They're going in to make sure that bugging equipment works so that they can monitor. To the extent we believe Gordon Liddy, one of the burglars, one of the most prominent ones, he wasn't one of them like a co-op, but he was in the operation. And he says, look, it's not to find dirt on the Democrats. It was to monitor what dirt they had on us. And, in absence of other proof, I find that most convincing from everything we see. They're trying to find out what secret weapon they would have. Lawrence O'Brien was the most formidable opponent. Yes, they were afraid of McGovern because there are other burglaries. That's another thing I think people have to remember. That it's not just the DNC. There's also the McGovern campaign headquarters. There's also an order, not actually accomplished, to break into the Brookings Institution, but Nixon wants that. There's also Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist office. And there could have been a much larger investigation of many more that might have been tied to Nixon, but Nixon was pardoned for any crimes he may have committed, which covered potentially new crimes, which didn't make it very attractive for investigators. We're going to talk about also that the DNC treasurer said that his home was broken into suspiciously. So there's a lot of things going on connected. But of all these people, Lawrence O'Brien seemed the most formidable. And, you know, if, yes, McGovern didn't seem like a great opponent, and Nixon was going to trounce him in an election, he only won one state, not even his home state of South Dakota. He just wins the Kennedy-run Massachusetts political machine there from the Kennedys, and he loses big. Nixon wins big. That doesn't mean it had to happen that way. And Nixon was afraid of some type of big last-minute scandal that might have come. And remember that in 1960, he lost an election. Towards the end, it seemed. And in 1962, he lost an election in the governor's race. And now he wanted to make sure that even these little mistakes didn't happen, that he wouldn't get caught. Now, the other thing is that ITT begets Watergate, because the ITT donation was being used by Lawrence O'Brien to hammer Nixon again and again. They saw how effective it was. What else does he have? They want to know. And if they can get this done, this covert operation, nobody knows about it, get it done quietly, and you just kind of, all of a sudden, constantly through the campaign, have knowledge of what your opponent's going to attack you on before you have it. That's a great thing. And that's what they were trying to do. That's the most logical explanation for what they were trying to do. It also matches other actions that they did take, which were campaign related. Yeah, I mean, we got to talk about the other burglary that no one talks about. June 21st, 1972. This is a few days after Watergate. Robert Strauss, the Democratic National Chairman, has for the first time provided details about a mysterious burglary at his Dallas home 2 weeks after the Watergate arrests. Mr. Strauss, who was the Democratic Party treasurer at the time, said valuable jewelry, furs, and silver were ignored by the burglars. They went through most of his papers instead looking for something. He could not connect the burglary with Watergate till recent months, but now felt it might have been the same people that did it, with the same motives. His statements were part of a 111-page deposition taken May 29th, and it's part of the $6.4 million damage suit that the DNC files against the RNC and the committee to re-elect the president. Here's what he says in the oral history. I was in Florida. That's where we held the convention in 72. Shortly prior to that, there were stories in the paper that Strauss was in Florida planning the convention, so they knew I wasn't there, and my home was broken into. I later learned a year or so later that it was the Watergate crowd that broke into our home. Helen's jewelry drawer was pulled out. The jewelry box was left on the floor with no jewelry taken. I always keep anywhere from 20 to 100 $1 bills just to have in my home in Dallas, just to give to people that knock on the door and need a couple of bucks here and there. They left the money. So they weren't after the money. Oh, we had some type of pain reliever drug in the medicine cabinet, so they weren't after that. I said, this is a strange robbery. Bob Strauss says, I thought they were a bad lot that did the Watergate break-in. The interesting thing in my case is I developed a more favorable impression of Richard Nixon after his disgrace than I had before. He and I agreed on China, several other issues there wasn't much support for. When I came out to support George H.W. Bush when he was president with China policy, where few people were, Richard Nixon called and congratulated me on that and said, you know, I think you and I are the only two people who have spoken up on this issue. He invited me for dinner. We had several nice dinners together at his request, though I must say that I don't think any better of him, nor do I think any worse of him, but I had a better relationship with him than most people. I think he would have made a first-rate president. I think he understood the presidency. He was right on some very big issues. He was ahead of his time. He was not an arch-conservative administration. But he just blew it. Paranoia got him. So it goes. there you go. A lot of stuff about Watergate you may not have known. Great book on Watergate is Garrett M. Graff, Watergate. Nice guy. Actually interacted with him via email. We're trying to get him on the show at the time he wrote the book. He's got another book on the dropping of the bomb of Hiroshima, and that's a good book as well. He's a good writer. A lot of detail in the book, and really fleshes out that concept of Greater Watergate. One of a few sources used here. Again, that's Garrett Graff, Watergate. Thanks for listening.
Your team just added its 67th AI tool, and also your 67th security blind spot. The good news? The Vanta agent works like a GRC engineer in the background, finding every app your team uses, scoring the risk, and drafting fixes for you. Vanta is the platform used by over 16,000 fast-moving companies like Ramp, Cursor, and Harvey, who are shaping the future with AI and staying ahead of AI risk. Get started at Vanta.com.